Hello everyone, good morning, welcome. My name is Maddie and this is my channel. Today we're going to be talking about some of my favorite reads from 2023. I know it's a bit late, but it took me a while to get here. I finally have everything set up. I have all my books in a nice little neat pile. I am ready to go. I'm ready to talk about my favorite books of 2023. On some really great books. I also read a lot of really bad books, but we'll get to that in a different video. First off, let's start with my favorite book of the year, Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. Now this book is a very interesting book because it's not only a murder mystery, but it's also very much like literary fiction where it's Hi, this is Editing Maddie coming to you super late. I just realized that I never actually explained the book Sharp Objects, which is a bit embarrassing, but oh well. Take two. Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn is all about this woman named Camille Preaker. Now, Camille Preaker is a reporter, and she is tasked with reporting on the murder of 3 young girls happening in her hometown. Now, Camille Preaker has basically gotten no contact with her family since she was an adult and moved out as quickly as she could. Her mother is very much emotionally, mentally abusive woman. She constantly cuts Camille down and compares her to her dead sister who passed away when Camille was really young. And Camille suffered from a lot of very traumatic things in her childhood. She was assaulted when she was in high school by multiple guys at once, and she writes it off like, oh yeah, it was like nothing, and she doesn't want to actually come to terms with the fact that she was a victim. And her sister died very young age. She was very ill. Camille does not have a very good relationship with her family. And then once she goes back to her hometown, she's basically treated like an outsider. Like no one wants her to be there. No one's excited to see her. And just from the minute that she gets there, she knows that it's going to be a very tough time. And she kind of strikes up this bond with this detective. They kind of have a little bit of an affair there too. And her newest sister, who's now 13 years old, she hasn't really come into contact with her. She hasn't really met her yet. She is the worst. Like, she is a demon child. She is like the spawn of Satan, a horrible person. She's an incredibly mean bully. Like, she's basically Regina George, but like on steroids. And Camille tries to, I guess, form a bond with her sister, who pretends to be like a perfect angel around her mother. Then of course behind her back she like terrorizes the town. Basically, as we're going throughout the story, Camille is working with the detective to try to figure out who exactly is killing these girls, because it's only been 3 victims and they're trying to rule out like serial killers and whatnot. And the whole focus of the book is really just on trauma and Camille going back to her hometown and unfortunately having to live through these memories again. I know this book had a TV show adaptation with Amy Adams, and I wasn't able to watch it, but I'm a little hesitant to, because even though I really adored this book, it touches on a lot of really difficult topics like self-harm, suicide, sexual assault, child murders and molestation. It's just a lot of things that are very hard to witness on the page, let alone see on the screen. So I'm really biding my time with watching that show because I don't know if I'll be able to handle it, but we'll see. And but yeah, otherwise, I would definitely recommend this book if you're looking to get out of a reading slump. It's a very short book, but again, content warnings out the wazoo. Please be aware of that as you're going in. But it's a really good murder mystery. Gillian Flynn is a phenomenal writer. She also wrote Gone Girl, if you're familiar with that. Also, if you were interested in the story of Gypsy Rose, and her mother medically abused her since she was a child, convincing her that she was really sick when in fact she wasn't. There is an air of that as well, especially around Camille's younger sister. I don't want to spoil anything because I really do want you to read this book, but just keep those things in mind. To give you an idea of Gillian Flynn's amazing writing style, I'm going to read you some quotes from the book. I began the cutting, and I was almost as devoted to it as my newfound loveliness. I adored tending to myself, wiping a shallow red pool of my blood away with a damp washcloth to magically reveal, just above my navel, queasy. Applying alcohol with dabs of cotton ball, wispy shreds sticking with the bloody lines of Perky. I had a dirty streak my senior year, which I later rectified. I'm a cutter, you see, also a snipper, a slicer, a carver, a jabber. I'm a very special case. I have a purpose. My skin, you see, screams. Is covered in words, cook, cupcake, kitty curls, as if a knife-wielding first grader learned to write on my flesh. I sometimes, but only sometimes, laugh, getting out of the bath and seeing out of the corner of my eye down the side of the leg, baby doll, pulling on a sweater and in a flash my wrist, harmful. Why these words? Thousands of hours of therapy have yielded a few ideas from the good doctors. So I would recommend reading this book for sure. It does get rather graphic in certain parts, and I would warn you again against the content warnings. This book is a very difficult read, even though Gillian Flynn is a masterclass of a writer. If you're willing to get out of reading slump, this is definitely the book to go. So my second favorite book of the year is Conversation with Friends by Sally Rooney. Sally Rooney is a tough nut to crack when it comes to the writing community. A lot of people really love her books, and a lot of people really hate her. There's really no in between, and it's mostly derived from her lack of quotation marks that she uses in her writing. It is rather jarring seeing her narration and trying to figure out which one's dialogue and which one's prose. So I will say that's a bit of an issue because it's hard to distinguish her prose from her dialogue. If you get that down, I think you'll really find that her books are incredible. I like how Sally Rooney approaches a human experience. Like, all of her characters are either very jaded or they're very much tortured souls just trying to find love and acceptance and intimacy. And a lot of the times they find it in the wrong places and it comes back to bite them later on. But I really like how she approaches these topics with the gravity and the weight that they all deserve. And these characters don't get away with all the terrible choices that they make, but you still grow to sympathize and love them as people as well. And a lot of these conversations make these characters feel so real to me. Like, I've heard and I've experienced these conversations myself, and it really made this book feel more alive to me. Like, these characters could walk off the page and be actual, real, living, breathing people. But before I read you my favorite lines, I should probably explain what this book is about. So, Conversation with Friends follows Frances, and Frances lives / hangs out with her ex-girlfriend / best friend, Bobby. She and Bobby do slam poetry at this cafe, and while they're at this cafe, they meet this woman, Melissa. And Melissa's really taken with these girls. She really likes them, especially Bobby. And she invites them over to her house for a party, and while there, Frances meets Nick, and she and Nick start up this torrid love affair. The book just goes through the beginnings of their relationship, the turmoil that they put themselves through, the morally gray area of wanting to be a good person while cheating on your wife and sleeping with a married man, and going into how these people really care about each other and love each other, but they also don't want to fully commit to each other, and just a lingering feeling of yearning and longing and lust and wanting to be together, but knowing that it's never going to fully happen. And I think that's really interesting, just seeing how lack of communication, like that trope that really annoys me in most places, is actually utilized really well in this story. Like, you see how these characters really feel, but you understand why they don't want to act on what they're feeling, because what they feel like they're doing is wrong. They're afraid to express their emotions because they're afraid of actual intimacy and vulnerability. Let's dive into the book a little bit and read some of my favorite lines. After a while, it felt so good that I couldn't see clearly anymore, and I wasn't sure if I could pronounce whole sentences. I kept saying please, please, though I didn't know what I was asking him for. He held a finger to my lips as if to tell me to be quiet, and I took it in my mouth until he touched the back of my throat. And as always, content warnings. I feel like so many of my books this year that I really loved are short and depressing. I think I think that's a sign. I think there's something a little bit wrong with me, but anyway, we're not going to question it. But yeah, so content warnings for this book. There is mention of endometriosis, infertility, miscarriages. I believe there are mentions of suicide as well as self-harm in this book. And I like to warn people about those because I understand that even though this book is incredible and it's short and it will get you out of a reading slump, I am certain, it is also a book that can plunge you into a deep depth of despair. And I want to make sure I warn you guys ahead of time before you put yourselves through that. Like with Sharp Objects, both of these books are pretty depressing, and they deal with a lot of very difficult topics. So keep that in mind as you're reading this. Otherwise, I would strongly recommend this one and Normal People by Sally Rooney. I'm trying, you know. If there are things I'm doing wrong, I want you to tell me. In a slightly pained voice, he said, "You're not doing anything wrong. It's me, you know. I'm just awkward." That was all he said. I didn't really know what to add. In any way, it seemed clear that no matter how unsubtly I fished for his reassurance, he wasn't going to provide it. We looked at one another with agonized expressions and then looked away. Downstairs in my room, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my bed, holding my knees against my chest and watching the light move through the chink in the shutters. Eventually, I opened up the window and looked out at the sea. It was dawn, and the sky was silvery blue and exquisite. In the room above, I could hear Nick walking around. I closed my eyes. I felt like I was very close to him, close enough to hear him breathing. sat at the window that way until I heard doors opening upstairs, the dog barking, and the coffee machine switched on for breakfast. Next up on our list, we have Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. And this book made me laugh so hard, harder than I've ever laughed for any book ever. Which is ironic because this book deals with a very serious topic of the Antichrist and the end of the world. It somehow made it so hilarious. If you're unfamiliar with this book or the TV show, I'd highly recommend watching it on Amazon Prime, by the way. It is very accurate to this book. The book is about an angel named Aziraphale and a demon named Crawley. Yeah, Crawley, like he's crawling. And these two have been essentially like acquaintances working against each other since the beginning of time, since the beginning of mankind. And ever since they have been tasked with being on Earth, right? They were employed by heaven and hell, and they've been living on Earth for centuries, for millennia. And they really like it on Earth, and they really like the lives that they have there. Aziraphale has his own little shop. Crawley has his nice car, and he goes around and he just explores the world, wreaks havoc on it. And they really enjoy these lives that they have, and the end of the world would ruin all that. They couldn't live on Earth anymore. They'd have to go back to heaven and hell respectively and live out the rest of eternity basically fighting a war and following orders, and they don't really want to do that. So they want to prevent the end of the world for purely selfish reasons, which I agree with wholeheartedly. If you have a nice life on Earth, what's the point of going back to heaven or hell? Am I right? So these two strike up this friendship, and they try to find the Antichrist and try to keep him from becoming who he was meant to be. And it's really funny watching them try to go about this nature versus nurture quest, where they try to prevent the Antichrist from coming to his full power so that way he doesn't end the world. And I would 100% recommend this if you are a fan of dry British humor. These authors are so funny. I was in stitches most of the time I was reading this. I was laughing like a maniac reading this by myself. I sound like a crazy person, but it's just that good. I recommend this wholeheartedly. One of my favorite books of all time, and you need to read this. If you haven't read this book, you need to pick it up right now, or you can at least go watch the show on Amazon Prime. To give you a glimpse into that humor so you understand what I'm talking about, I'm going to read you a few lines from the book. So this is when the Antichrist is at the hospital and they're trying to perform a switch so they can get him to the right parents that would corrupt him and turn him into the Antichrist. And it's about this nun, Sister Mary. Sister Mary headed through the nighttime hospital with the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness safely in her arms. She found a bassinet and laid him down in it. And that is what they call the Antichrist for at least 20 more pages. They keep just calling him this long title, and they keep repeating it over and over and over again, and it's hilarious because it's just this baby, and there's like spawn of Satan, destroyer of worlds, father of lies. I'm like, it's a baby. He's harmless. He hasn't even become the Antichrist yet. I just found it incredibly funny how they kept repeating this title over and over again. This one is about the Satanists and humanity as a whole. Most of the members of the convent were old-fashioned Satanists, like their parents and grandparents before them. They'd been brought up to it and weren't, when you got right down to it, particularly evil. Human beings mostly aren't. They just get carried away by any new ideas, like offer people a new creed with a costume and their hearts and minds will follow. Anyway, being brought up as a Satanist tended to take the edge off of it. It was something you did on Saturday nights, and the rest of the time you simply got on with life as best you could, just like everyone else. This book also has a lot of footnotes, which I find to be particularly hilarious as well. I definitely recommend reading this whole book, and especially the footnotes, even though it's very easy to gloss over them. But as you can see here, this book is extremely witty, very profound, and the very many silly ways that humans interact with each other and just how they are and their true nature. Definitely give this book a read. You'll be doing yourself a favor, believe me. Next up on my list is a book that made everyone cry, A Man Called Ove, Frederick Backman. And A Man Called Ove is about this old curmudgeon named Ove, who is in the last few legs of his life. He's an elderly man living alone after his wife had sadly passed, and she was a color to his black, white, and gray life. She made his life worth living, even though that they both had a tragic life. They lost a child in an accident while they were vacationing in Spain, and she was crippled from that, and he was never able to get justice for that. Like, they basically sued the city, and the city just blew them off. And it was very interesting to see how, even though Ove is very angry, that one pedantic neighbor that makes sure that everything is up to code and bothers you if you're like 1 inch out of line, even though he's like that, you kind of see he's like that for a reason, why he doesn't trust government officials, because they literally screwed him and his wife over so many times. Understandably, he's not a very nice guy to be around, but it's really nice how the story unfolds, and it doesn't really justify his behavior, it just explains why he's so upset. Like, he lost his wife, they had a really tough time with the government, they lost their child, and they were never able to have a child ever again. And it was just really nice to kind of sympathize with the man that otherwise he would try to avoid, like your life depended on it, and to see his icy heart warm up and melt and grow 3 times bigger once his neighbors move in and he finds a new purpose in life once again. I liked how this book was a coming of age before an elderly man, and just prove that no matter how old you are, you're never too old to learn a lesson, to change, to grow, and to really accept others and to be open and vulnerable to people and their stories, and understand that people are angry and maybe some of them have a good reason, and in this case he did. I warn you that this book is a bit of a tearjerker, but those were my best moments. In the I really welled up. I will probably start crying when I read these lines, so be forewarned. So this scene is about Ove when he meets his wife for the first time. She had a golden brooch pinned to her dress, in which the sunlight reflected hypnotically through the train window. It was 6:30 in the morning. Ove had just clocked off his shift and was actually supposed to be taking the train home the other way. But then he saw her on the platform with all her rich auburn hair and her blue eyes and all her effervescent laughter, and he got back on the outbound train. Of course, he didn't quite know himself or why he was doing it. He'd never been spontaneous before in his life. When he saw her, it was as if something malfunctioned. So cute. I love it. I love a good love story. You like reading? She asked him brightly. Ove shook his head with some insecurity, but it didn't seem to concern her very much. She just smiled and said that she loved books more than anything, and started telling him excitedly what each of the ones in her lap was about. And Ove realized that he wanted to hear her talking about the things she loved for the rest of his life. Ove stayed there with her hand in his for several hours, until the hospital staff entered the room with warm voices and careful movements, explaining that they had to take her body away. Ove rose from his chair, nodded, and went to the undertaker's to take care of the paperwork. On Sunday she was buried, on Monday he went to work. But if anyone had asked, he would have told him that he never lived before he met her. Not after either. So sad. I love this book. Fair warning, if you want to read this book, you're in for a beautiful, wonderful, gripping ride. Definitely a tearjerker, but it's a very beautiful story, very enriching, very much about the human experience and just learning to live after the loved ones have passed. And I will warn, content warning, there is suicide in here and infertility. But otherwise, one of my favorite books of all time. Next up on my favorite books of 2023 list, I have The Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. Margaret Rogerson is a masterclass of prosaic narration. Her exposition is so beautiful and makes me so jealous. I want to write like her when I grow up. She is a phenomenal writer. Not only that, but she is a great storyteller. And Sorcery of Thorns is all about this magical world in which books are actually alive. And they are called grimoires. And these grimoires must be tended to and taken care of, or else they can metamorphose into these great monsters called malefics. And these malefics can actually wreak havoc. And the higher class or level that these grimoires are, the more havoc they can wreak on the village and the library. And our main character, Elizabeth, she works at the library Summershaw, and she's actually an apprentice. And at the library, she runs into this magister or wizard named Nate. And in her world, wizards are considered to be evil, or at least in her mind, they are considered evil. And even though she is raised to not like magisters or wizards, she strikes up a bond with him, especially after she learns of this terrible plot where someone is going to awaken these class 12 malefics, so the most powerful malefics and destructive ones in the whole world, and basically release them to open up this portal. And she wants to stop it, or else it's going to essentially end the world as they know it. And as they team up together, they strike up this friendship that turns into something more. So enemies to lovers trope, but in an actually healthy and natural way. Like, it progresses over time. It doesn't just flip a switch and they don't grow to like each other because, oh, he's hot and so is she. It's more based off of this growing bond that they are in this together and they need to work together in order to save the world. And I thought that was really refreshing because I don't usually like enemies to lovers trope because it can be kind of just bad. It's never handled properly, but in this book, this is one exception for me. I will say with fair warning that the plot does get kind of slow in the middle. It took me a long time to finish this book, but I'm so glad it did. I just had to take it in sips. I had to experience it slowly. That's what I do with books that I really like. For example, Discovery of Witches. I started that book in 2022. I have not finished it because I like it so much I don't want it to end. I had the same feeling with this book, but then I just charged through it and I'm like, you know what? I want to finish this book for 2023 and I'm super glad I did. And like I said, the plot does get a little bit slow in the middle. It can be a bit of a slog. And one thing that people really critiqued about this book is you know who the villain is right off the bat. But I actually like that because then it falls into dramatic irony. So you as a reader, you want everyone else in the book to realize, hey, this person is bad. You have to figure it out. And you're just waiting for them to get that. And it's suspenseful and it really keeps you in the book because you're just waiting for everyone to come to terms with who the real evil person in this book is. And it's not Nate, that's for sure. So I feel like that criticism isn't really founded. It's literally a type of irony. Dramatic irony is a very good tool for suspense. So I don't understand that criticism exactly, but I do understand the length. It does get a little bit slow. Just fair warning, but otherwise, you will love this book. It also has an air of Howl's Moving Castle in it, so if you like that theme, I would also recommend this book as well. Give you a bit of a taste into the world of Margaret Rogerson. I really like this world. I thought it was super creative, super interesting. I like it when books are alive and breathing. They have personalities. They can talk to people. I really like that aspect, and I can't wait to experience more of her books in the future. So the excerpt I'm going to read is in the very beginning when she first meets Nate, and one of the bookshelves topples over because, again, the books are alive and they're trying to escape and metamorphose into Malefic so they can escape. And now they're trying to clean up the mess. Without waiting for her reaction, he turned to study the wreckage. After a moment of consideration, he raised his hand and spoke a string of words that left her ears buzzing and her head turned inside out. Dazed, she realized that he was speaking in Nokian. It was unlike any language she had ever heard before. She felt as though she would recognize the words, but the moment she tried to repeat them to herself, the syllables trickled from her mind, leaving only a raw, resounding silence like the air after a deafening clap of thunder. Her hearing returned with a thesaurus of rustling paper. The pile of spilled grimoires had begun to stir. One by one they lifted into the air, floating in front of the sorcerer's extended hand, amid swirls of emerald light. They spun and flipped and shuffled, sorting themselves back into alphabetical order while behind them the fallen bookcase righted itself with a labored creak. The broken shelves fused whole again. The grimoires flew back to their original positions, a few reluctant stragglers switching places at the last second. Magic, she thought. That is what magic looks like. And then, before she could stop herself, it's beautiful. Next up, we have my favorite and only horror read of the year, and that is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Now, you may recognize the title of this book because it is a Netflix show, as you can see by the sticker on the cover here, which I don't know how I feel about these stickers on these covers, but it's a good reminder to go watch the show, that's for sure. I will warn you though, if you have seen the show, you're going into this book thinking that they're the same. They're not. Very different experiences, very similar elements, like Eleanor or Nell is in the show. She has like this similar fate as one does to the show. She has a tie like Nell in the Netflix special. She has a tie to the house through her mother, and her mother is calling her to stay, to save her, to stay there with her, which I found to be very perplexing and creepy. But anyway, so The Haunting of Hill House follows this young woman named Eleanor, and Eleanor is a very lonely, very sad, very directionless woman who lives with her sister, and she's very unhappy, and she wants a change of scenery. And she gets that in the form of a letter from Dr. Montague. Dr. Montague is a professor who studies ghosts. He studies supernatural entities, and he wants to go to Hill House to study the ghostly activities there. And as she's going there, she steals her sister's car. She drives there. She arrives there by herself, and she's terrified. because this house feels alive and she feels like it's watching her and waiting. And as the other people arrive, more and more ghostly activities happen. The initial reason why Dr. Montague called her to the house is because she actually has a history of poltergeists, like they attacked her house with stones or something. And I like the idea that Hill House is the fifth main character of this book, and it's watching them, and it's waiting, and it has a personality. And even the way that the house is built, the architecture feels off kilter. And it's a symbol of how Hill House is in a way very crooked and very demented and very otherworldly. And it's also interesting because Shirley Jackson wrote this book in the 1950s, and there were a lot of allusions to the original caretakers being a lesbian couple. So Luke's great-grandfather, he built the house, and then he neglected his children in the house. And again, a haunted house is very symbolic of the women within, because again, women are tied to domesticity, and the house is a symbol of domesticity. So staying at home, the kitchen, the cooking, the cleaning, raising the children, that's all tied to the woman. And if it's haunted, that means that there's something happening to the women, whether or not it's abuse, whether or not it's mental illness, and it could be all these different factors. And in the house, these two sisters were neglected, so that's kind of where the haunting begins. It's a cursed house because there was no love in the house to begin with. Their father left them there to go pursue other wives, and they were left there with their governess or nanny to be raised, and then when they grew up, they were fighting over this house. So again, not only was this house a place where they were raised in neglect and abandonment, but also a source of this weird tug of war, like the sibling rivalry that ultimately indirectly killed the older sister, who was a true inheritor to the house. And the older sister lived there with her female companion, and neither one of them got married. And I'm like, okay, so they were together, they were lovers. I thought it was kind of funny reading that in the year 2023, being like, oh, I see what's happening there. It was really sad because this house had potential for love, right? The older sister had her companion. They seemed to be very happy together, and the sister had to go and ruin that. So it was like this family killed the house. The family put this disease, they cursed the house with their hatred, with their apathy towards each other. And I found that to be very interesting. I thought Shirley Jackson did so much with so little. Like, this book is so small, and yet I still love it, and I still think about it to this day. This book was so rich with symbolism, I loved it. So each of the four main characters, so we have Eleanor, Theodora, Luke, and Dr. Montague. And all of these characters are given rooms, their own special room with their own special color. So Eleanor is in the blue room, Theodora is in the green room, Luke is in the yellow room, and Dr. Montague is in the pink room. At first I thought, oh, that's a very strange detail. I wonder why she mentioned this so many times. And I realized, of course she mentioned it so many times. She emphasizes it because it's important. And so I looked up what each of these colors symbolizes, and it's basically who these characters are. Eleanor is in the blue room, and blue symbolizes honesty and confidence and reliability. And besides the fact that Eleanor basically stole her sister's car, she still showed up to Hill House. She said she was going to come, and then she did. And even though she is terrified of Hill House, she is confident that this is where she needs to be. Or the negative connotations of the color blue is passivity. So she doesn't really stick up for herself, she's just kind of there and existing. It also can symbolize loneliness, which Eleanor is so lonely. She is so desperate to be loved and to be seen and accepted that she even commits herself to Hill House, even though there are dark forces inside. Blue also symbolizes depression, and similar to loneliness, Eleanor is very depressed. And she's so depressed to a point that she makes a very serious and critical judgment call at the end of the book of committing to Hill House forever. So that was very interesting. And then Theodora's room is green, and Theodora is, although she is cheery, she is calm, she's super fun all the time, she is also green with envy because the house starts to pay attention to Eleanor over her, which is a very strange thing to be jealous about, Because why would you care that a bunch of ghosts went to haunt Eleanor more? It was very strange. And then Luke's color of his room is yellow, and yellow symbolizes intelligence and higher thinking, and he's a very intelligent guy, but he's also very arrogant. And I thought yellow was very interesting because he comes from a long diseased line of family where he is the inheritor of Hill House, but his family is basically cursed, and they're what's haunting Hill House. And Dr. Montague's room is pink, which also is a symbol of femininity, of course, but it's also a symbol of childlike wonder and innocence and naivete. And he is very childish. Like his wife, when she shows up later on in the book, she basically treats him like a child. Like she's basically his mom, and she's very condescending to him, very patronizing. She talks to him like he's 5 years old instead of this professor at this college. And I thought that was very interesting how even though he is very naive, it also is his detriment at the very end, because his naivete makes him have this false sense of optimism when it comes to Hill House. Like, oh, this is going to be my breakthrough moment. I'm going to be super famous after I write this paper. And it doesn't happen. And I wanted to read the ending to you because I believe that this is just proof of amazing writer that Shirley Jackson is. Hill House itself, not sane, stood against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within its walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and the doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there, walked alone. Oh, so creepy, but I love it. Next up, we have my favorite Agatha Christie book of all time, And Then There Were None. And this book follows 10 strangers who were all sent invitations by a mysterious, cryptic man named Mr. Owens. And Mr. Owens is this unknown entity. No one really knows who he is, but they go to the island anyway, which is not the best life choice to make, but I digress. So these 10 strangers go to this island for a party, and while they're there, Mr. Owens does not show up. And as they're all gathered in the dining room waiting for this big feast party thing to happen, this big booming voice announces in the speakers that he knows all their dirty little secrets and that they're all going to die by the end of the night. And they're stuck on this island. They cannot get off. The boat has left them. There's a huge storm outside. It's the isolation trope, the stuck on a secluded island trope. If you get yourself stuck on an island in the middle of a storm, that's on you. That's your fault. There's no way to get off. And as these characters try to grapple with what's happening, as they are killed off one by one, they start to turn on each other, tensions are high, and they really come to terms with whether or not they are guilty, whether or not they are worthy of vacation. And I really like the twist at the end too. I thought that was superb. So many murder mystery thrillers lose it for me at the end because there's so many loose ends to tie up, and I feel like it's going in a really good direction, and all of a sudden the author just pivots and pulls the rug out from underneath the reader. But instead of doing that, Agatha Christie pulls the rug out from underneath me, but in a good way. Like, I was pleasantly surprised with how this book turned out. I can't say that about a lot of other murder mystery thrillers that I read. I definitely would recommend this one, especially if you're getting out of a reading slump. This book was so quick. It had me in a chokehold. I had to finish it. I finished it in like a day. That's how quick it was for me. Definitely a good book to get out of a reading slump. Definitely a good book if you're a murder mystery thriller lover, because Agatha Christie is the queen of mystery, and this book proves why. I also like the theme of vigilante justice. Like, this Mr. Owens character feels like he needs to be the judge, jury, and executioner. These people have done reprehensible things. They have either killed people, they've neglected people, they have indirectly murdered people, they've been accessories to murder, and he feels like they should be brought to justice. He feels like they should be held accountable completely for their crimes, and this is the best way to do it. And this scene that I'm about to read to you is a scene in which Mr. Owens reveals himself. The whole party had dined well. They were satisfied with themselves and with life. The hands of the clock pointed to 20 minutes past 9. There was a silence, a comfortable, replete silence. Into that silence came the voice, without warning, inhuman, penetrating. "Ladies and gentlemen, silence, please." Everyone was startled. They looked around, at each other, at the walls. Who was speaking? The voice went on with a high, clear voice. "You are charged with the following indictments. Edward George Armstrong, that you did upon the 14th day of March 1925, caused the death of Louisa Mary Cleese." Emily Caroline Brent, that upon the 5th of November 1931, you were responsible for the death of Beatrice Taylor. William Henry Bloor, that you brought about the death of James Stephen Landor on October 10th, 1928. Vera Elizabeth Claythorne, that on the 11th day of August 1935, you killed Cyril Ogilvie Hamilton. Philip Lombard, that upon a date in February 1932, you were guilty of the death of 21 men, members of the East African tribe. John Gordon MacArthur, that on the 4th of January 1917, you deliberately sent your wife's lover, Arthur Richmond, to his death. Anthony James Marston, that upon 14th day of November last, you were guilty of the murder of John and Lucy Combs. Thomas Rogers and Ethel Rogers, that on the 6th of May 1929, you brought about the death of Jennifer Brady. Lawrence John Wargrave, that upon the 10th day of June 1930, you were guilty of the murder of Edward Seaton. Prisoners at the bar, have you anything to say in your defense? So after learning about these people's crimes, you understandably wouldn't be very sympathetic. Like, people out of their own selfish intent. And just the way that Agatha Christie goes about it is, even though you know these people did something wrong, you still want to know what happens. You still sympathize with them, at least a few of them, not all of them. Some of them are pretty terrible people. And you at least sympathize with them and understand that some of these people did it out of desperation, some of these people did it out of selfish intent, but all of them come to terms more or less with what they have done, especially in the end, and they kind of accept their fate. And it's really interesting seeing them unpack all of these feelings and going on a journey with these absolutely heinous human beings who rightfully deserved what they got in the end, but wanting to see how it happens and how it takes place is really the cherry on top of a fantastic thriller. Cultish by Amanda Montell, The Language of Fanaticism. And this book utterly shocked me to my very core. I was so pleasantly surprised by this book. I first learned about this book when I was listening to the podcast Sounds Like a Cult, and it's with Amanda Montell and another girl. Her name escapes me at the moment, but Amanda Montell advertised her book on Sounds Like a Cult podcast, and I have to read this. I love this podcast, and she's a very intellectual, very well-spoken lady, and I thought to myself, I have to read this book because Amanda Montell is a linguistics major, so she studied the art of language and she applies that to cults. And I was amazed. I learned so much from this book, and that's what I love about nonfiction books nowadays. I'm starting to more lean towards nonfiction, and it's been helping me so much, just discovering so many new things about our world, and I just love the idea of cults. I used to be a huge Criminal Minds fan when I was younger. So this book dives into the psychology, to the behind the scenes of how these cults rope you in, how they seduce you, how they manipulate you into basically giving up your whole life for them. Everything from SoulCycle to QAnon to Jonestown to Heaven's Gate, all of these cults follow a very similar pattern, and just the way that Amanda Montell went about this was amazing. I was hooked from the very beginning all the way till the very end. I immediately pre-ordered her other book, The Age of Magical Overthinking, and I am so excited to read that. That is one of my most anticipated books of 2024. Each chapter focuses on a different cult. So there's one about MLMs, one about SoulCycle, which I thought was funny until I read it, and apparently there's this one guy who worked himself to death. Literally, he worked out to death, and it was something about him being dehydrated or just pushing his body so hard that it literally collapsed from exhaustion. The first two chapters were hard to get through just because of the nature of these cults. So you had Jonestown, you had Heaven's Gate, graphic and just kind of hard to read because the whole time you're screaming at the book, at these people, like, get out, you're going to die, you have to leave, and just the mass murders and just the horror behind what happens when these cult leaders go too far. And I thought that was really tragic, really sad, but it was interesting to see the evolution of the idea of cult and the origin story of Drink the Kool-Aid, where all these people drank poisonous Kool-Aid and they died because they listened to a cult leader who misled them. And I'm going to read some really great quotes from this book that I think really highlight and illustrate the main points of cultish. A linguistic concept called the theory of performativity says that language does not simply describe or reflect who we are, it creates who we are. And this one was very interesting too because it talks about the semantics behind what these people are saying. Like, they have a reason for trying to manipulate and drag you into this kind of circular thinking of the cult. Using systematic techniques of conversion, conditioning, and coercion with language as their ultimate power tool, Jones and Applewhite were able to inflict unforgettable violence on their followers without personally laying a finger on them. Truly, gives you chills. The first key element of cultish language, creating an us versus them dichotomy. And it makes sense because it's a psychological phenomena where you create this insider group mentality where you're like, oh, we're the special ones, we're in on it, everyone else is a liar, or they're a deceiver, or they're lost, and it's like, oh, kind of like religion. It's like us versus them mentality, like we have all the answers. They don't know the answers, and they're going to try to lead you astray, so you shouldn't listen to them, and you have to turn your ears against them and know that they're just liars or of the devil. They're trying to deceive you. And it makes so much more sense understanding that because you see it in a lot of cases. You see where people are led astray because they're made to believe that they are in the right when they are so wrong. Contentious debates aside, thought-terminating cliches. So this was my favorite part of the book. So there's this new concept called thought-terminating cliches, and I thought it was really interesting. Thought-terminating cliches are by no means exclusive to cults. Ironically, calling someone brainwashed can even serve as a semantic stop sign. You can't engage in a dialogue with someone who says that person is brainwashed or you're in a cult. It just is not effective. I know this because every time I witness it happen on social media, the argument comes to a standstill. So that's the whole point of semantic stop. So these people try to say something to stop the conversation and keep it from going, like complete and utter standstill. Once these phrases are invoked, they choke the conversation, leaving no hope of figuring out what's behind the drastic rift in belief. Contentious debates aside, thought-terminating cliches also pervade our everyday conversations. Expressions like, it is what it is, boys will be boys, everything happens for a reason. It's all God's plan. And certainly, don't think about it too hard, are all common examples. I've heard these semantic stop signs so often, and I did not know what they are. Now that I do, like, okay, how do I battle against them? So yeah, Amanda Montell is a very talented writer. She's also a very talented podcaster. I definitely recommend checking this book out as well as her podcast. So I have a book that I really enjoyed, and as the year went on, I kept thinking about it, and it kept its hooks in me and it wouldn't release me. And I realized that my initial criticisms of the book weren't substantial enough for me to give this a low rating. So I originally gave this a 4-star, and I'll explain why, but I think it's going to be closer to 4.5, almost 5 stars. I'm not quite there yet, but I'll explain why. This is How You Lose the Time War by Amel Almator and Max Gladstone. I'm sorry that I butchered the first name. I'm sorry. I keep trying. I'm not very good at this. I'm a teacher. It's in my nature to butcher names, okay? I'm sorry. But, so this book is about 2 characters, red and blue, hence the birds on the front cover. And they are 2 agents in opposing companies in this war, in the Time War. And one of them works for the agency, the other one works for the garden. And these 2 agents are going throughout time. They're time travelers, right? And they're going throughout time, and they're trying to stop each other from changing it. So in the future, the agency exists, and the garden is actively working to make sure it doesn't exist, and they're working against each other. And these 2 are rival spies, and as they are trying to thwart each other's missions, they start writing letters. At first, they're kind of arrogant letters, you know, rubbing in each other's noses when they trick the other one. Then over time, they learn to respect each other, see each other as equals, then eventually fall in love. And so this book primarily takes letter form, very beautifully written, but you don't really know what's going on. I'm not even kidding when I'm saying that what I just explained to you is the extent of the explanation of what we're given in this world. So that's initially why I gave it a lower rating, because I don't like it when I don't understand the world and I'm not giving enough efficient world building to understand. Like, I need all the background information first before I can get started, before I can move forward. And this book didn't offer me that, But even though this was a hindrance to me and it made me kind of annoyed, I didn't want to take it away from the book, because that's the true nature of the book, is that you don't need to be fully immersed in the world in order to still enjoy it and root for these characters. And I did cry a little bit at the end of the book, so I think that's another reason why I gave it a higher score, is because any book that elicits a strong positive emotion out of me, like sadness or happiness or laughter, I will automatically give it a high score. An excerpt I'm going to read for you is in the very beginning, when Red and Blue start off this letter writing relationship. On a span of blasted ground, she finds a letter. It does not belong. Here there should be bodies mounded between the wrecks of ships that once sailed the stars. Here there should be death and dirt and blood of a successful op. There should be moons disintegrating overhead, ships aflame in orbit. There should not be a sheet of cream-colored paper, clean save a single line in a long trailing hand. Burn before reading. Red likes to feel. It is a fetish. Now she feels fear and eagerness. She was right. She searches shadows for her hunter, her prey. She hears infrasonic ultrasound. She thirsts for contact, for new, more worthy battle. But she is alone with the corpses and the splinters in the letter her enemy left. It is a trap, of course. Vines curl through eye sockets, twine past shattered portholes. Rust flakes fall like snow. Metal creaks, dress and shatters. It is a trap. Poison would be crude, but she smells none. Perhaps a new virus in the message to subvert her thoughts, to seed a trigger, to merely to taint Red with suspicion in her commandant's eyes. Perhaps as she reads the letter, she will be recorded, exposed, blackmailed for use of a double agent. The enemy is insidious. Even if this is but the opening gambit of a longer game, by reading it, Red risks commandant's wrath if she is discovered. Risk seeming a traitor, be she never so loyal. The smart and cautious play would be to leave, but the letter is a gauntlet thrown, and Red has to know. So this is the conception of their letter writing back and forth. And it's very interesting how creative the authors get with the letters. Like, they're not all letters. They write to each other in the plants. They concoct these insane experiments where one of them, I forget who exactly, there's two of them and I can't remember, but one of them goes back in time and writes on a tree, and then it grows over time, and then after hundreds of years, the other one cuts open the tree and finds the letter. And it was just so intricate and so beautiful, and the imagery was astounding to me. And I just loved how creative these women are in trying to make sure that they weren't found out by their superiors, and to hide messages to each other through time as they're trying to prune certain timelines and make sure certain events happen, like the one that we just read. And I just thought it was amazing. I thought it was super creative. I love the aspect of the letter writing and the art and the science that went into it. And the ending was very sad, but I don't want to spoil anymore because I really want you to read this one. So, this is How You Lose a Time War. Highly recommend. This is also a great book if you want to get out of a reading slump. It's very short, and again, a bit depressing towards the end. So, again, keeping with that theme, short, depressing books. The only one that's not super depressing is Good Omens. Sorcery of Thorns kind of has a moody, macabre feel to it. Yeah. Next book on my list is another short, depressing book, In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. And this book is a memoir about Carmen's abusive ex-girlfriend and how their relationship progressed from something beautiful and warm and sweet and divine to something very akin to a haunted house. And Carmen's writing voice is very, again, prosaic, very raw, very deep, very poignant. And the book is broken up into many essays. So it's not chapters, but it's essays, and each page or so has a brand new title. It's In the Dream House, Deja Vu. In the Dream House, Schrodinger's Cat. In the Dream House, Chekhov's Gun. And I really liked how all these essays really pinpoint the exact time when something changed in their relationship. And it was really interesting to see the progression, and actually done well. Like, all of these stories that she's sharing with us have a purpose, and how it goes from being happy-go-lucky and freeing, and just basically going from the happiest relationship she's ever had to the worst one she's ever had, where she's running into the bathroom and locking the door just to protect herself against her girlfriend, which is horrific. And all just the verbal abuse, the emotional abuse, the manipulation. and just how this chronic cheater thought that she could treat people so poorly is just amazing to me. But there are a lot of amazing metaphors and motifs in literature that Carmen brought up that also helped me better understand The Haunting of Hill House. Just prove how transcendent this book is, that I'm able to apply what I learned from this book into other ones. So in The Dream House states that the haunted house is pointing at basically the haunting of women. It's not really about a house. It's looking at the family dynamic, at the women in the family, more specifically the mother, and how when you learn about the abuse and the lack of care or love, you can better understand why the house is haunted. It was also very interesting because she provided so many insights into the world of the queer community. As a straight woman, I do not belong to that community, so I'm looking at it from an outsider's perspective, and just seeing how she equates just the queer identity and not being taken seriously, not only as a woman but also as a lesbian, because again, women are not seen as threatening or violent in our society. We're like calm, demure, little domesticated animals, and we couldn't possibly harm a fly. And when women call other women for being abusive, they're not taken seriously, and it's really terrifying how many women are essentially let off the hook because of their, not only their anatomy, but also because of how the patriarchy views us, and how sexism is not just harmful to women because of men, but also because of other women. I thought that was really insightful, and I never thought of it that way, and she really opened up my eyes to a lot of elements of that community and symbolism behind the haunted house. And I just want to read a few essays. Don't worry, they're not super long, from this book, just to give you an idea, like a sense of why this book is amazing, why it's a phenomenon. Everyone should read this book, but I will warn you, content warnings, that this book is very difficult to work through. It deals with emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse in a couple places, as well as homophobia and horror as well. Dream House is not a metaphor. I dare say you have heard of the Dream House. It is, as you know, a real place. It stands upright and is next to a forest and at the rim of a sword. It has a foundation, though rumors of the dead buried within it are almost certainly a fiction. There used to be a swing dangling from a tree branch, but now it's just a rope with a single knot swaying in the wind. You may have heard stories about the landlord, but I assure you they are untrue. After all, the landlord is not a man but an entire university. A tiny city of landlords, can you imagine? Most of your assumptions are correct. It has floors and walls and windows and a roof. If you are assuming there are 2 bedrooms, you are both right and wrong. Who's to say that there are only 2 bedrooms? Every room can be a bedroom. You only need a bed, or not even that. You only need to sleep there. The inhabitants gives the room its purpose. Your actions are mightier than any architect's intentions. I bring this up because it is important to remember that the Dream House is real. It is as real as the book you're holding in your hands, though significantly less terrifying. If I cared to, I could give you its address, and you could drive there in your own car and sit in front of the Dream House and try to imagine the things that have happened inside. I wouldn't recommend it, but you could. No one would stop you. And that is page 1. First page, and already I was hooked, line and sinker. I was so invested in this book. So it's very interesting to hear how Carmen equates her abusive relationship to the Dream House and how she compares it to that, and how it's actually a symbol of her abuse and her trauma, how each room has its own significance in that relationship. And I thought that was really gripping, very beautiful. Dream House is haunted mansion. What does it mean for something to be haunted exactly? You know the formula instinctively. A place is steeped in tragedy. Death at the very least, but so many terrible things can precede death, and it stands to reason that some of them might accomplish something similar. You spend so much time trembling between the walls of the Dream House, obsessively attuned to the position of her body relative to yours, not sleeping properly, listening for the sounds of her footsteps, the way disdain creeps into her voice, staring dead-eyed in disbelief at things you never thought you'd see in your lifetime. What else does it mean? It means that metaphors abound, that space exists in 4 dimensions, that if you return somewhere often enough, it becomes infused with your energy, that the past never leaves us, that there is always atmosphere to consider, that you can wound air as cleanly as you can wound flesh. In this way, the dream house was a haunted house, a sudden inadvertent occupant of a place where bad things had happened. And then it occurs to you one day, standing in the living room, that you are this house's ghost. You are the one wandering from room to room with no purpose, gaping at the moving boxes that were never unpacked, never certain what you're supposed to do. After all, you don't need to die to leave a mark of psychic pain. If anyone is living in the dream house now, he or she might be seeing the echo of you. Last but not least, an excerpt from Dorothy Allison's short story, Violence Against Women Begins at Home. And her delving into that community, what it looks like to be abused by that community. Or be abused by members of that community, sorry. Queer folks fail each other too. This seems like an obvious thing to say. It is not, for example, a surprise to non-white queers or trans queers that inter-community loyalty only goes so far. But even within ostensibly parallel power dynamics, the desire to save face, to present a narrative of uniform morality, can defeat every other interest. The queer community has long used the rhetoric of gender roles as a way of absolving queer women from responsibility for domestic abuse, which is not to say that activists and academics didn't try. When the conversation about queer domestic abuse took hold in the early 1980s, activists gave out fact sheets at conferences and festivals to dispel myths about queer abuse. Scholars distributed questionnaires to get a sense of the scope of the problem. Fierce debates were waged in the pages of queer periodicals. But some lesbians tried to restrict the definition of abuse to men's actions. Butches might abuse their femmes, but only because of their adopted masculinity. Abusers were using male privilege. Some argued that consensual S&M was part of the problem. Women who were women did not abuse their girlfriends. Proper lesbians would never do such a thing. There was also the narrative that it was simply complicated, the burden of the pressure of straight society. Lesbians abuse each other. So I thought that was very interesting how the patriarchy and heteronormative ideals of gender essentialism, of men are abusive, women are not, kind of bled into that community. And of course, like, not all lesbians are abusive. That's not what I'm saying here. But it's very interesting to see how back then and even now we still don't give these victims the space to really talk about this unless it's in a well-written book. And I thought that was very interesting, seeing that perspective of, oh, these women are hurting and they need our help. I can understand why that would feel like a betrayal, because when we're looking at these minority groups like women or people of color or the queer community, when one person from that community does something terrible, all of a sudden all the people from that community are horrible people, right? And that's why people are scared, because they don't want to look bad. They don't want people to assume that, oh, all lesbians or butch lesbians, the doms, are the ones that are harmful, when the femmes or feminine women or people that identify as women can be just as harmful. And I thought that was very interesting. Definitely recommend this, but please proceed with caution. This book is not an easy read, but it is very eye-opening, very insightful, and I would definitely recommend it if you are into literary fiction. I think you would get a lot out of this. Next is a book that fell on the same crux, or the same cross, as This Is How You Lose the Time War, where I didn't know exactly everything that was happening, and I don't like that feeling. I need to know everything. And that is my toxic trait. I get upset when people don't spill the tea. And again, that's kind of the true nature of this book. Like, the focus on this one, similar to This Is How You Lose the Time War, is not on the world itself, but more on the characters interacting in this world. And that one is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. And again, I had mixed feelings about this book in the beginning. I originally gave it 4 stars and then transferred it to 4 out of 5 because I read this similar to This Is How You Lose the Time War. I read these books in the same month, and in February I finished them, and then I was still thinking about them in December and how incredible they were. So that was a sign to me. If I can still think about a book from the beginning of the year to the end and still remember quite a bit of it, and not only that, but still enjoy it and still feel depressed from that initial read, that is worth a 4 to 5 rating, I would say. Our Wives Under the Sea follows Leah and Marie, and Leah is a marine biologist who goes with her crew in this submarine excursion in deep water, and they get stuck there. But what was supposed to be a 3-week trip turned into a 6-month scramble for survival. And Miri is up on the surface, and she is terrified for her wife, and she wants to find out what's happening. And the company, which I'm pretty sure was a scam company, basically disappeared. It was very interesting because I read this, and then a month later the submersible happened. Like, what are the odds? That was such weird timing. And I think that made me appreciate this book even more, because not only is it so well written, but it's also culturally relevant. But anyway, so this book follows 2 timelines. So it's Miri mostly reacting in the present, and Leah and her experiences underwater trapped in the submarine. And in the present with Miri, she is struggling after Leah came back to try to get her wife back. And Leah is completely different. All she does is sit in a full tub of salt water every day and just stares into nothing, and her body is like slowly dissolving into water. And it's kind of like a little bit of body horror there. And outside of the body horror stuff, it's just really tragic to see Miri and her trying to consolidate this, what was left of their relationship, and trying to get her wife back, but her wife is gone. Like, that wife died in the submarine, and now she has this shell, this husk of a human living with her, and just a tragedy of watching someone you love wither away right before your eyes. And then Leah, her timeline was super scary, like Apollo 13 level of intense. And I was so scared for her, even though I knew she survived. And you know she survived in the very beginning of the book. This is not a spoiler, everyone knows. And I knew that she was going to survive, and I was so terrified. I'm like, oh God, how does this happen? And just watching her and her crew try to not slowly descend into madness, and there's like a voice outside the submarine like calling to them, and like, come out, and they see this monster, and I'm like, what is that? What is that monster? What happened? And I don't know, I don't tell you. But despite that frustration, I still found this to be an incredibly enjoyable read. Again, another short book, also slightly depressing. I don't know, I was in that trend, I was in the algorithm, that niche. I know what I like in books, and short, disturbing, and depressing books are my cup of tea, apparently. Speaking of tea, I haven't had any liquids in a while. I just want to read an excerpt here just to give you a taste of what that's like, without revealing too much about the story, like I haven't already. But anyway, this is Leah's flashback, and she is recalling the first time that her father taught her how to swim, and when she developed this passion for water and deep sea in the ocean. I love this story. Loved it. I suppose for its slapstick, but also for the way it went on to suggest that deep things routinely rose to the surface. Heyerdahl goes on to describe dark nights on which strange phosphorescent beings, on some occasions bigger than his craft, reeled up toward the ceiling of the sea and bumped heads before descending. As we sank, I tried to tell myself this story, and it worked. To a certain extent. I thought about the way deep things move upward, of the ocean's escapability, even despite its depths. If you've got breath enough to scream, as my father said, you're not drowning. And so I held my breath and thought about screaming and imagined the ocean coming to an end. This excerpt is when Leah is first descending into the ocean. She's kind of nervous, even though she's done descents like this before, and she's recalling her father's words and the other stories like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and reflecting on how even though the ocean is terrifying and beautiful, it also has an end. Even though it is literally 2/3 of the earth, even though it feels endless, there is, again, it's finite. It doesn't go on forever. And again, if you enjoy books about romance and life and tragedy, not just in death, but also in losing someone before they're gone, I would definitely recommend this book, especially if you're interested in the submersible. I think this is a very good way to bridge those two entities. And a bit of content warning, there is a bit of body horror, terrible corporations that don't care about their people who are drowning in sea, and I don't think of anything else. No, I think that's it. Alright, we have another literary fiction queer romance, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. And this book, I originally really enjoyed because it's very similar to Dream House, because this book is reflecting on an abusive relationship. In this case, it's Ocean's mother, and he's writing these letters to her. And he is essentially reflecting back on his childhood and their very tumultuous relationship, and how the abuse from that relationship prevented him from really coming into his own and really accepting his sexuality at first, and his inability to be open and vulnerable and intimate with his boyfriend, and how he struggled with that personally was very interesting. And I thought it was very beautifully written. I really enjoy Ocean Vuong as an author. I was very interested to see how his childhood bled into his adulthood and how it was affecting him. Did not enjoy was one scene in particular which turned this book from a 5-star to a 4-star read. And I feel bad about it because, again, in the same boat as Our Wives Under the Sea and This Is How You Lose a Time War is not really a huge glaring issue outside of the very difficult topics it discusses. But this is one scene where Ocean and his boyfriend are being intimate in a lake. And they're performing an act that makes Ocean essentially perform a code brown. He goes number 2 during this sexual act, and it was too much. It was too much for me to handle. I read Tender is the Flesh, which is a book about cannibalism, and somehow that one scene about him pooping in a lake made me so physically sick that it turned my stomach and I almost vomited. And I don't know, it just kind of ruined it for me. Like, I understand it's really not that big of an issue, but I hate talking about bodily functions in books. I just don't want to talk about it. It's just like so juvenile to me, and it's just so, it's too realistic. And I just like my books to be poop free. Anything that comes out of that area, I just don't want to hear about it. I don't want to talk about it. Just keep it out of there. But yeah, 4 out of 5 stars on Earth Briefly Gorgeous. If you just skip over that part, it's actually a pretty decent book. I'm sorry, I feel bad. I feel like that's such a small, fastidious little detail, but I just couldn't take it. It's not for me. I'm so sorry. So if that kind of stuff turns your stomach too, still read it. Just probably skim by that one lake scene and you should be fine. But I want to read you an excerpt, not from that scene. Don't worry, I wouldn't do that to you. But I want to read you an excerpt about him reflecting back on his mother and their relationship and who she means to him. But it was stillness, I realize now, that I sought, not of her body, which kept ticking as she slept, but of her mind. Only in this twitching quiet did her brain, wild and explosive during waking hours, cool itself into something like calm. I'm watching a stranger, I thought, one whose lips creased into an expression of contentment alien to the Lon I knew awake, to the one whose sentences rambled and rattled out of her schizophrenia only worse now since the war. But wildness is how I had always known her. Ever since I could remember, she flickered before me, dipping in and out of sense, which was why studying her now, tranquil in that afternoon light, was like looking back in time. I really like that passage because it adds a whole new human element to his mother. She's been through so much trauma, which I believe that environmental stimulus triggered her schizophrenia, or at least made her mental illness worse, like it exacerbated it. And really sympathizing with her and understanding that it's not her fault she's like this, it's just a product of her childhood trauma, and now the cycle is continuing into his childhood and how she's bringing her own trauma into his. And I just liked that idea of like he's looking at a stranger, like the woman that she is when she's asleep is not the same woman she is when she's awake. So I really like that metaphor, I really like that imagery. And again, this is a masterclass, another amazing memoir talking about abuse and relationships. And yeah, I just wish it just didn't have that one scene, or else this would be a definite 5-star read for me. Next up on my list, we have Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagasaki. And these two women are sisters and doctors. They are actual credentialed, qualified experts on the idea of therapy and the mind and neurology. And I read this book back in January, and I recommend it to anyone who can hear it because this is a self-help book that actually is very helpful and was actually very insightful and made me better understand not only how my body works, but also about how our society works. And burnout is basically talking about the stress cycle and how when our bodies are stressed, they react in certain ways, and how if we don't take care of that stress or round out the circle completely, then we can get like a panic attack, a mental breakdown, we can get sick, and any other ways our bodies react to stress. And so they're talking about a way to round out the stress cycle, make sure that you don't push your body to the breaking point, even though in our society, in the way that America, capitalistic hellscape is constructed, it is very easy to get stressed out. There's a lot of ways that we get stressed out in our society. We're overworked, we're underpaid. Like, it's very hard for us to find not only an avenue for us to release our stress, but a community that can help us release it as well. And it was very fun hearing about other people's ways of releasing that stress. Like for me, it's writing, it's reading, it's making vlogs about books. And it was very fun seeing how our bodies reacted and how we can prevent ourselves from going on burnout, on overload. And I also liked how they talked about how loneliness can kill you. As if I didn't have enough to be stressed about, but essentially how loneliness kills, lack of sleep kills. I like books that teach me a lot of things about topics that I think I know, but really I don't know. And it was very nice learning about those new things, because now I'm equipped with all that knowledge I feel like I can share with other people. Another aspect of burnout that I really enjoyed was the prospect of the human being versus the human giver. And in the case of burnout, they say that the human being is men in our society, and they're taught that they can have dreams and they can rule the world and they have possibilities, they have a future. But women are raised to be human givers, and human givers give to the human beings, and they make sure that they fulfill their dreams, live exceptional lives. Whereas the human givers, if they want to try to be human beings, they're shot down. Like, no, you can't have the right to vote. No, you can't be paid the same. No, you can't wear pants. What are you doing? What are you thinking? And it was interesting too, because they talked about how other human givers, women, put other human givers down for trying to become a human being, or just being treated with the same respect as men are. And I see that a lot in our society too, how women police other women and try to keep them in those spaces because they were forced to stay in those spaces, and how those aspiring to be seen as a human being, or at least equal to men, how they are deemed essentially immoral, or they are going against grain, going against society, even though, as we've seen throughout history, those people are the ones that help out other women and make lives better for them. So I definitely recommend checking this out if you are looking for a way to get out of this stress cycle that you've locked yourself into, and learn a few other things along the way. Next up, we are moving from my 5-star, 4.5-star reads into my 4-star read books. And although these books, I still found them to be more exceptional than other books I read this year, they definitely are my favorites based on their story, not necessarily their writing voice. So I won't really be delving into the prose or reading any excerpt from these books, because I feel like the story as a whole is what made me love these books, and I can't read a whole story to you right now. So just explain the basic ideas of these books and summarize them for you and give you my reviews. And then I won't spoil anything, because again, I want you to experience these books on yourself. And then if you like these books as well, please make sure to like this video and comment down below on what your favorite books were of 2023 and any books you're looking forward to reading in 2024. First book up, I would like to talk about The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. And this book was my first book by Michaelides, and I really liked it. This book is about Theo, a psychotherapist who goes to this mental hospital to take on this new patient, Alicia. And Alicia is the titular silent patient. And Alicia was charged with murdering her husband, but she has also pleaded insanity, taken to this mental hospital. And she hasn't talked to anyone since she's arrived there. Actually, since the court case, she hasn't talked to anyone. She is silent. And that's why she was deemed insane by the court, and that's why they took pity on her. And as he was going to this hospital, and as he's tending to Alicia, she gives him a diary, and that is how she speaks throughout the book. And it talks about her relationship with her husband. And you have these dual timelines where we delve into her diary, and then we watch Theo in his life, and he's trying to unpack the mystery to see if she really was the one who killed her husband. And the plot twist at the end, I really liked it. Again, I thought that this author did a great job of wrapping up the murder mystery. I kind of saw it coming, or I had suspicions, but I really liked how it ended. I really liked how Theo wasn't really who he seemed he was. I liked how Alicia had a dark past and secrets of her own, and she wasn't entirely innocent either. And I like that. I like the morally gray characters in murder mysteries because it's so black and white with humans. Like, everyone is delving into gray a little bit. And I liked how it wasn't a clean-cut line. Like, each person was, in a way, the hero and the villain in their own story. So, definitely recommend it. I understand how this plot twist can be kind of interesting to some people, but I really enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend it. Next up, we have a bit of a controversial book. And this book is The House by the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. And the reason why I say that this is a bit of a controversy is because T.J. Klune openly admitted that he used the story of indigenous children being displaced from their homes into white homes as the forefront of his story. And that's basically what this story is about. It's about these magical children who are taken out of their homes that they are deemed unworthy by upper management, like basically the government of this world, and they are taken into other homes and displaced. And he used that as inspiration for this book, and a lot of people called him out because he's basically capitalizing off of these children's trauma and not advocating for it in the best way. I agree with their criticism. I understand where they're coming from, and I will say that the ending of the book was very hollow for me. So this book follows Linus, an agent for like basically the government that keeps track of all the children. He's in charge of like the super magical children. And he is tasked with going to the House by the Cerulean Sea to check on this orphanage because the Antichrist is rumored to be there. And as he goes there, he realizes all the prejudice these children suffer through and how all the normal, mundane people hate them because of who they are and what they represent. And again, you see that parallel between the indigenous children in Canada and the US and the magical children in this world. And his conclusion, or his solution to the problem of displacement, of prejudice, of discrimination is just be nice to each other. And all your problems just magically go away. And I'm like, you think that people haven't tried that already? There's so many other issues to this problem. This is not like a sweep it under the rug, very quick, easy, simple solution. This requires a very complex, like, map that we have to navigate through and try to nip all these issues in the bud if we will ever be able to do that. And it definitely will not happen in our generation, in our lifetimes, but working through all these problems to make sure that these children aren't taken out of their homes, aren't seen as the other, aren't seen with discriminatory lenses is just never going to happen if we're only nice. And like, yes, that's part of it. Yes, you should see people as equals and be nice to them and understand this is a person with a story, not just, you know, the other from an outsider's perspective. But again, a lot of other complicated issues to the problem. Didn't like how T.J. Klune responded to the controversy. But if you're looking for a book similar to this one, you don't want to give T.J. Klune any of your money, I would definitely recommend The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. And this one is very similar to The House by the Cerulean Sea, and that book I think I actually like more than The House by the Cerulean Sea. And this book is basically like Mary Poppins. And it follows Mika Moon, who is a young witch living in London. And she can't have a coven because the way magic works in her world is that if witches gather together too long, their magic becomes noticeable. And so they can't stay together for too long. They have to disperse. And anyway, one day she's called to go help out at this orphanage of sorts with these young 3 witches who need to learn magic because they don't have a teacher and their magic's getting out of control. And as she goes there, she meets the children, she gets her own found family, she meets this guy named James who's kind of a curmudgeon, who's very cynical, who's very cold towards her at first, then he warms up to her in the end. I really like this book because it explored the topics of found family, and it was very sweet and wholesome and nostalgic, and I really like the themes of like womanhood and community, and witches of course is very fun for me as well. Definitely recommend this during spooky season if you're a fan of practical magic or hocus pocus. It definitely has those elements in there too. The reason why I did give this book a higher rating was because at the end, a bit of spoiler alert, so if you don't want to get spoiled by it, I won't delve too much into it, but you can skip ahead. At the end, there was a convenient twin plot, like a secret twin plot, which was very soap opera-y for me, and it took away from the natural progression of the events. So yeah, very similar. Both situations, children could be taken away from their homes, lose their homes, were already displaced and could lose that home. So if you like that general theme of found family and love and acceptance and supernatural children, definitely check out those two books. Next up, we have another book that also has people on the fence about the overall message or theme. And that is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. Midnight Library is all about this young woman named Nora. And Nora is contemplating taking her own life. And as she's about to do that, she magically, psychically transports into the Midnight Library. The Midnight Library is full of books, but not just books, but basically portals into other lives that she could have lived if she made different choices. So she picks out a book, she transports into that body of that person. So she's in her body, but it's not really her body, like her variant. So her variant, when she's in her variant's body, she takes over their mind. So she makes choices for them. And I didn't like that because it screamed Wonder Woman 1984. It screamed like that weird possession, rapey thing, because she does a lot of things that these characters probably wouldn't have otherwise done if she wasn't in their bodies. And it made me very uncomfortable. I didn't like it that much because of the aspect. That's why I gave this book a 4 stars, not a 5-star. And also because the oversimplified idea at the end is like, oh, you won't be suicidal anymore if you just be happy with what you have. Like, I like the initial message that sometimes we need to be reminded that our life is good and there's a lot of good in the world and we should be grateful for what we have, and sometimes wishing or thinking of the what if I did this, what if I did that, that life would have gleaned its own kind of unhappiness. Like, no matter what, you're going to be unhappy, so you might as well learn how to be happy in this life and not think about the what ifs and not think about things you could have done and live in regret, but live in the moment and learn to love yourself and love your life now. And I like that theme, but again, it's oversimplifying this issue of mental health. And of course, not everyone with depression or anxiety or schizophrenia or any other mental health, debilitating mental health condition, not everyone can just be like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna be happy. Toxic positivity does not heal mental illness. I feel like Matt Haig really missed the mark on that. And if the part of her taking her own life was extrapolated from the book, it was just her contemplating what if, and then she was taken to the Midnight Library, I feel like that would have been way better with how simple the message was at the end. But yeah, the stuff about mental health kind of ruined that for me. It was the reason why I definitely gave that 4 stars, as well as the possession thing. I did not like that. Next up, we have another Agatha Christie entry, and that is Murder on the Orient Express. And there wasn't anything really wrong with this book. I just didn't like it as much as And Then There Were None. Like, And Then There Were None was a curve, and then I just graded all the rest of her books based off that curve, essentially. But yeah, still an enjoyable book. I would definitely recommend it. It's another Hercule Poirot book in her Hercule Poirot series. It's like her detective Sherlock Holmes, essentially. So Murder on the Orient Express follows Hercule Poirot, and he is traveling on the Orient Express, and on that train he meets this guy named Samuel Ratchet. Samuel Ratchet is this rich, kind of scummy millionaire. Like, he's rich, but he came across those riches through crime. And Hercule Poirot does not like him right off the bat. He can see right through him. He is just transparently icky. And as they are on the train, Samuel Ratchet begs Hercule Poirot, hey, I'm scared for my life. I feel like someone's coming after me. Can you help me? Hercule Poirot says no. And in the morning, Samuel Ratchet is found dead in his car, in his train car. And Hercule Poirot has to solve the murder mystery of the man that he refused to protect in the first place. Like, okay, I'm just gonna clean up the problem that I created, but that's fine, you know. At least he's very good at his job. But overall, I like this book. Again, it wasn't as gripping or as entertaining as in Then They Were None. But I did like the bit of social vigilante justice towards the end. I'm not going to get into too much details because I want you to be able to experience it for yourself. But yeah, overall, this is my second favorite book of hers. Definitely recommend. 4 out of 5 stars. Next up on our list, we have a Hades and Persephone retelling, A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. So Persephone in this book, she actually doesn't have her powers. She is a goddess, but she has to hide her divinity in order to fit in with the rest of the world. Because in this world, the gods are not just high up on Mount Olympus judging them, playing with the humans like they're pawns in their own chessboard. They're actually interacting with the humans as a whole. Like Zeus has his own news channel, Hades has like his own nightclub, like Las Vegas. And so they're very immersed in humanity. And Persephone just wants to have a normal life and be a journalist. And as she's working as a journalist, she gets an internship at the Athens newspaper, and she decides to report on Hades. So she goes to his nightclub, and they strike up a love affair. And I really liked how this book took the original, very problematic myth of how Hades and Persephone came together and still incorporated those elements. Like there is a pomegranate. They do have like this, I guess you could say, bet that goes into the underworld, and Hades is still kind of like this broody, festering guy, but he does have a heart of gold at the end of the day. And I liked how Demeter is seen as like the villain, how she's actually like the antagonist of the whole story because she keeps Persephone down. And I also liked how Persephone, when she realizes her new power, she's not just the princess of spring, but she has like this darkness in her too. If you're a fan of Hades Persephone's retellings, I would definitely recommend reading this book and stopping. I haven't heard very good things about the sequels following this book, and it's actually pretty good as a standalone. It didn't really need to have sequels, but you have to continue it. It was very popular, so I guess the author wanted to continue it. But anyway, Touch of Darkness, definitely recommend. Next up on my list, I have my second favorite murder mystery writer, and that is Lucy Foley's The Guest List. So I have to hold it up like this because I don't have the cover. But anyway, The Guest List by Lucy Foley is very similar to And Then They Were None in the way that the characters are secluded on an island, trapped there by a storm, and they cannot leave. And I really like this dynamic because it contemplates the idea of the superego versus the ego and id. And when humans are out in nature, they're not bound to the same rules of civilization. Like they don't act the way that they do in the city, at their jobs, or just the way they interact with the public, are not bound by these societal rules, so they are free to be more animalistic or more visceral. Basically, it's this wedding party, and they're going to get married on the secluded island. And the bridegroom's friends, Will, so his friends are toxic masculinity as people, and very much Duncan too. Like he's very manly in the audiobook, he had a very deep voice, and he's always like trying to pester the other man, try to make them feel less than him, like he's trying to be like the alpha male, and the other men just kind of go along with it, except for Jono, who's very much the heart of gold, very sweet, actually decent guy who just wants to do good by his friends. And they all have this dark secret, this very hard, tragic thing that happened at their school. And at their school, they have this tradition where the boys basically play this little survival game where they're taken out somewhere where they don't know, like they're blindfolded. So they're basically kidnapped from their dorm rooms, blindfolded, taken out to this secluded area, to this forest, and they are left there and they're forced to come back. And something tragic happened at their school where one of the kids didn't make it home because he drowned. And the other boys are still reeling from that tragedy, especially Jono. Like the other boys don't really care because again, they suck. But Jono is still very much remorseful. He is really upset that that happened. But anyway, back to the wedding. So as the wedding's happening, you kind of see all these dynamics. Like all the men, you know, like they act like they like each other, but really they're resentful towards each other. The bride, Jules, she has a sister named Olivia who also has a dark secret related to Will, and she's just a tortured soul, and she's really struggling with the wedding. Then you have the caretakers who also have their secrets, and you have Jules' best childhood friend and his wife who are also harboring resentment towards each other, and their relationship, their marriage is on the rocks. And it's very interesting to see how when the tensions rise and fester and things start to turn dark at the island, how all of them, they transition from their nice behaviors to their good behaviors to the more animalistic, visceral ones. And even though I really like this book, I was so gripped from the very beginning, and I wanted to like it, but the ending did not wrap up the way I wanted to. It just felt like there was no justice in it, and even though the main villain did get their true comeuppance in the end, it just left so many other things untied. Like, I don't want to get too much into it because I don't want to spoil anything, but basically it was a disappointment. It wasn't wrapped up as nicely as And Then There Were None, which again I was kind of comparing this one to, which might have ruined it for me, but oh well. But yeah, I still recommend Lucy Foley. I really like her books, and The Paris Apartment is also a close second to this one. The last books I'm going to talk about on my best reads of 2023 are the last 3 installments of the Lunar Chronicles, and that's Scarlet, Cress, and Winter. The Lunar Chronicles, if you're not familiar with this series, it's a book series based off of fairy tale retellings. And each book takes a different point of view of different characters. So the first book is Cinder, and I read that with my students back when I was a creative writing teacher, and they loved it. I had students come back from that summer and tell me, oh my gosh, Miss Maddie, I got the whole series from the library and I read through them all and I loved them. I was like, oh, that's great, maybe I should read the series, and I did, and I liked them too. So this book series is definitely for all the ages. So in this world, the Lunars, or the people from the moon, have psychic abilities. They can manipulate the energy around people, make them do things they don't want to do, read their mind, and basically manipulate them to see what they want them to see. Queen Levana is the villain. She is the queen of the Lunars, and she wants to take over the whole world. And basically these characters, so Cinder in the first book, Scarlet, Cress, and Winter, all working together to stop the war against the Lunars and basically keep her from dominating their whole world, taking over and finding peace, and making sure that the rightful heir to the throne, the princess, actually rules over the Lunars and not Queen Levana. And I really like this series. Overall, I think I would give the core books 5 stars. Even though these books, each in their own right, were 4 to 4.5 stars, I would definitely say that the book series as a whole is 5. I definitely would say make sure you understand the order of the books first. So the first book is Cinder, then Scarlet, then Cress, then Winter. I did not know that Winter was the last book when I read it, so I was a little bit surprised. So make sure you know that Winter is the final installment in the core series. Stars Above is like the extra credit at the end, and then Ferris is a prequel. Alright everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to leave a like and a comment down below. Let me know if you've read any of these books and how you felt about them. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Have a great day.